Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Channel S, Friends of Bangladeshi program. Each time we bring a very special friend. Today is no exception. Before I introduce him, let's go and see a video clip.
Councillor Mike Picket for Southgate Ward. In 1972, Micheal travelled to Dhaka, where he met Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who advised him not to stay in Dhaka, but to go out into the villages and ask local people what they needed. And that is what Micheal did. Micheal chose to go to Saraikandi, Bogura district, which had been badly affected by war, making it difficult for the locals to have access to medical treatment. Micheal decided to live there and arranged for medical personnel from Europe to start up a medical clinic specializing in gunshot and mine injuries. On return to the UK, he joined the United Kingdom Immigrants Advisory Service, a charity that provided legal advice and representation at immigration appeals.
Let me introduce that very special friend. He is Micheal Picket. I have known him for nearly 2 decades now, or maybe over. Micheal, welcome to Channel S.
Thank you very much, Ahmed.
Where were you born?
Although I didn't sound like it, I was actually born in Ireland.
Ireland.
And in a small town called Portaferry, which was basically a fishing town at that time, when I was born there in 1946. But my parents, my father actually was a Londoner, my mother was Irish, but they came to England because my father had been in the army in India, although never in what was then East Bengal, but he had come out of the army, and then he joined the Air Force. So he was then posted to England, and so we then came to live in England, in Somerset, down the road from Bath, believe it or not. I lived in a place near Minehead.
Minehead. Tell us when you joined the NGO. It was a French NGO?
Yes, it was indeed. In fact, in 1969, I worked for a firm of cartographers. They were quite a specialised map makers, and I worked making maps, drawing maps for the engineering and the military. And I just happened to see in a copy of the Guardian newspaper that there was a French chap in London trying to start up an NGO, a British branch, and I wrote to him via the newspaper, and I then joined them, and I was one of the first to start in the office, which was in the Strand in London. Okay. And we were called Frères des Hommes in French, which more or less translates into English as brothers to all men.
So then you went to India?
Yes, originally they had a project in Bihar. In 1967 there was a drought in Bihar state in India. The monsoon failed 2 years in a row, and people were absolutely desperate. It was a famine, and so the NGO I worked for went out there to try and get water. I mean, we worked with Indian organisations there, hand in hand, and we were drilling tube wells and building hand-built wells as well to irrigate the land.
And during the Liberation War of Bangladesh, where were you?
I came back from India, and then I was working in London for the organisation, trying to raise money. But at that time, in March of 1971, the war broke out in Bangladesh, and that's when this enormous movement of people, it's not people aren't certain how many, but
because Bangladesh was declared independent.
That's correct.
On 26th of March.
Yes.
So you were in...
I was in London at that time, on that date, and I first became aware of the idea of Bangladesh was at that time because people were coming to try and raise money to help the refugees that had gone into India. And so I joined an organisation there as a volunteer called Save Bangladesh. Okay. And I met quite a lot of other people. I met Abu Said Chowdhury, who was in London quite a lot that time, who went on to become the president of Bangladesh. But in that time he was in exile in London. I remember going to see him speak in Trafalgar Square, and I was very impressed with him and what he had to say about his new country. But what happened then was I went to India India, and I was working on a child nutrition project in New Delhi with an Indian organisation. But when the Indians entered the war in December of 1971, I was asked to go to Calcutta, and I think it was anticipated that this war is not going to last very long. In fact, it lasted probably about
9 months.
Well, the actual intervention of the Indians lasted for about, the Pakistanis surrendered after about 10 days in Dhaka, and then the Indians stayed for 3 months after that. They left in March of 1972. Anyway, so when I was in Calcutta, as soon as it was possible to get on a flight from Calcutta to Dhaka, I did. So I arrived there about the first week of January, I think just a couple of days after Sheikh Mujib came back from
Bangladesh via London and Delhi.
That's correct, yeah. So that's how I got there, and I didn't know anything about Bangladesh. I couldn't speak a word of Bengali, and I came out of the airport, and I must say you got a very big, strong and friendly welcome when we arrived there. And I just told a man in a baby taxi to take me to a hotel. Well, he took me to into the Intercontinental Hotel, which at that time was the best hotel in Dhaka. Well, I didn't have much money, but I stayed there for a short time, and then I moved to the Purbani Hotel, which is in Motijil.
Yes.
And it was very interesting there because with Sheikh Mujib's return, he called for the freedom fighters, the Mukti Bahini, the Mukti Fauj, and all the other groups to come into Dhaka and to hand in their weapons. And I can remember standing, looking out the window of my hotel down into the big square next to Grindley's Bank in Dhaka, and these guys started firing all their ammunition off into the air, and I thought I'd better get back into the room because it would be dangerous. And a lot did actually hand their guns in, but not all of them did.
Immediately after you met Bangabandhu.
I did indeed, because I met a gentleman there who was in the cabinet office. His name was Rab Chowdhury, and he said, well, why don't you come with me now? And I went, and we went to a very nice house near Ramna in central Dhaka.
Ganabhavan?
That's correct. That's the name of it. I'm sorry, it escaped me. And I met Mujib there, and I did ask him. I explained who I was and why I was there, and he said, well, you know, don't hang around in Dhaka, to be honest. Go out into the countryside, go out to the villages. And so I took his advice, and that's what I did. I must say, I mean, I never met a head of government before, you know, face to face, as I'm sitting with you now, but I found him a very warm, avuncular figure, and very easy to talk to. And so I was quite... well, not shock's the wrong word, but I enjoyed meeting him. He seemed like a very nice man to me.
So you have been very lucky.
Extremely. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time.
Right time, yeah. Then you went to villages, and whereabouts?
Well,
which village?
We went, because the organisation I'd been with in India had worked with refugees in West Dinajpur, which is just over the border.
Dinajpur?
Yes.
Okay.
Not the Dinajpur in Bangladesh, in northwest Bangladesh.
In West Bengal.
That's right, yes. And a lot of them had come from the Bogra district, so we thought we'd go to Bogra district.
Bogra.
Okay. And so that's where I went. And I remember meeting up with the civil surgeon in Bogra and also the DC, and he said, well, why don't you go out to Shariakandi? Which is
within the Bogra district.
Yes, it was about 15 miles east of Bogra, up on the Jamna River. But very difficult to get to because the bridge, during the actual war, the bridge out of Bogra to take you there was being destroyed, it had been blown up. And so you had to go on a little ferry, and then when you got to the edge to the river at Bogra, at Shariakandi, that was the River Bengali River it's called, there was no bridge there at all anyway, so you went on a ferry, which is actually two boats tied together with a platform on top.
So you went there,
yes.
And then what did you do?
Well, I went and saw the Circle Officer Development, who's a government official, and he said, well, why don't you go and stay in the old WAPTA building? The WAPTA, that's the Water and Power Development
Authority.
Yeah, it had been abandoned. So we went down there. There was a little bungalow, there was a go-down, and there were some offices. So went there, and that's we established a headquarters, if you like. There was no electricity in Shariakandi. There was no running water, but local people were very helpful.
The trip, what was the purpose?
It's to find out what it's in a
people
way
wanted.
It's what do people
What did
want?
you find?
They were crying out for medical
Medical
assistance.
assistance.
The nearest hospital was the Muhammad Ali Hospital in Bogra.
Bogra, yeah.
Muhammad
That's
Ali.
quite far, isn't it?
It was about 15 miles
15
away.
miles, but with the communication.
Very difficult.
yeah.
It wasn't a paved road at that time, but Muhammad Ali Hospital, the civil surgeon, who we got on quite well with. I mean, the hospital was named after Muhammad Ali, who was the third Prime Minister of Pakistan, who actually came from Bogra. And I'll mention it to you later. I met his brother later on, and worked with him. But anyway.
So you met a French physician there?
No, I wrote a report on what we'd seen and what people wanted, and then it wasn't long. We had a French doctor came and joined us, and also a Swiss nurse. She was a nurse anaesthetist. They set up a little operating theatre. They also established a clinic for people to come in with their ailments. Most of the conditions that people have is what you see normally in rural Bangladesh. They'd have stomach upsets, skin diseases such as scabies. There were some people with more serious illnesses. At that time, smallpox.
And when you moved about, there were any problems like mines or anything?
Yes, there were difficulties because, you know, any war is like this. Later on I went to work in Vietnam and also in Cambodia during the wars there, but Bangladesh is no different from any other country that's been at war. Things don't calm down immediately. Some people take advantage of the situation to settle old vendettas and grudges. So there was a lot of gunfire going on almost every day and at night.
We'll continue.
Yeah.
We have to go for a short break.
Oh, all right, okay.
Viewers, we'll be back soon. Stay with us.
Okay.
Welcome back. We were talking about mines after the Liberation War. So, Mike, you were saying about the mines,
Yes,
when you moved about.
The road between Bogra and Sherikandi is about 15 miles, and it's a dirt road. Some of it was herringbone patterned with brick, but most of it was just dirt. But, you know, every now and again, occasionally it was mined. These are mines left over from the war. People had, I don't know where they came from, but they got hold of them. And we had a number of incidents. The worst was, in fact, a country bus got blown up. The back wheels of the bus went over the mine, and a lot of people brought to our little clinic for treatment because that was the closest.
So Red Cross were present?
Well, it was difficult then, or dangerous to travel on that road. So the International Committee of the Red Cross, who actually were in Bangladesh to deal with the Geneva Convention. In other words, it's to do with all the prisoners. I mean, there were 60,000, 70,000 Pakistani soldiers who were prisoners of war.
In fact, 93,000.
Was it 90? Was it, well, I underestimated it, but it was a lot. But they were away, so they travelled around the country by helicopter, but they did lay on one trip a week for us to get in and out of Sherikandi and to deliver things like mail and personnel and what have you. So they did that, then we avoided having to go on the road.
December 16th, 1971, where were you?
I was in Calcutta, poet waiting to come to Dhaka.
Dhaka.
Yeah.
When did you return back to Dhaka? How many days after?
On the 6th, yeah. No, I got to Dhaka, I think it was around about the 3rd of January.
Few days later. Well, 2 weeks, I think.
Yeah.
2 weeks later.
Approximately, yeah.
Now, you return back to a very independent, liberated country.
Well,
how did you feel?
Well, you're talking now about 1971. Well, we worked throughout that year, and in fact, you know, there's a lot of things that weren't available in Bangladesh. I mean, I don't want to enter the political spectrum, but the fact is that under Pakistan, I think, from my own reading and my own understanding of talking to people, the Bangladeshi people, or let's say the East Pakistanis to be accurate at that time.
The resilient people.
Yeah, they didn't benefit from their economically under Pakistan rule from West Pakistan. It was quite evident. You could see the way the infrastructure was neglected, the way the institutions have been allowed to deteriorate. But anyway, people were very resilient at that time. Refugees, a lot were then coming back. But there was a shortage of money, obviously, but there was a lot of things that were done. For example, I don't know, Ahmed, if you remember, the Beatles were very famous at that time. They had a big concert in America.
And Ravi Shankar.
Exactly, and they raised millions and millions of dollars and pounds and what have you. But so there was a great deal of world sympathy for Bangladesh.
So the Indian army departed Bangladesh. Were you in Bangladesh? Or?
Yes, I was there. They left actually in March of 1972, and a lot of people quite saying, "Oh, they'll never leave Bangladesh." But they did. There was although the war ended on around about the 16th of December, there was still a lot of mopping up to do, and so the fighting did carry on in little enclaves. But these are the sort of things that happen at the end of the war.
So, tell us about the hotel or the PG hospital, Shahbag Hotel.
Yeah, apart from following Sheikh Mujib or Bangabandhu's advice about going off the villages, we did have an interest in Dhaka. And, you know, across the road from the Intercontinental Hotel was what used to be the Shahbag Hotel. And actually it had been taken over by the government, and it was now
a hospital.
Exactly. It was the Postgraduate Medical Institute, and I happened to meet Nurul Islam, Professor Islam, was the director of it, and talking to him, he said, you know, he told me that one of the biggest problems was the limitations on surgery and also maternity services because of a lack of blood. And so we were talking about, well, why don't we start up a blood bank? And he said, that's a very good idea. And so we got we raised money in France and some here in the UK. A French professor of hematology came out to work with Professor Islam, which they did. It wasn't this particular gentleman. I'll tell you about him in a minute. So they came out and they brought a lot of equipment to get the blood bank going, and we did. It took about 4 or 5 months to get it working inside the former hotel.
Who came to officially open it?
Well, that's very interesting because I didn't know it at the time, but Professor Islam also happened to be Sheikh Mujib's personal physician. And so he invited him to come and
officially open it.
Yes, and he did. He came. Excellent. Again, he was mobbed by people. You could hardly move that day around the hospital, but he came and he opened it and he wished us well, and so that was a decent thing for him to do.
You went back to Sharia Kandi?
Yes, in fact, we lots of things we had to do. For example, you know, Bangladesh is a very watery country, and it has a number of ports. Well, there was Khulna, there was Chittagong. I know that
a lot of rivers.
Yes, and communications can be very difficult. And in fact, the way the infrastructure was created in Bangladesh under British rule, at that time, Calcutta was the capital of Bengal. So Calcutta was the centre of everything. So everything led to Calcutta, not to Dhaka. Believe it or not, no.
So then the government, the Bangladesh newly formed Bangladesh government's rural development program started, and you played a part in it.
Well, we did indeed. Because,
tell us about it.
Well, we knew that the government had a policy of building rural health centres, and we thought, well, we could like to have an opportunity to work with the government in building one, and we decided we'd build it in Sharia Kandi.
A clinic.
Yes, it would be a clinic.
How many beds?
50 beds, I think we had.
50 beds.
Yep. So that meant we
funded by?
Well, mainly from donations from people in France and here in the UK.
Okay.
And but we got a contractor involved. We drew up the plans, and they built it. And 30 years later, I went back to see if it was still there, and it was.
It was, yeah. I remember you going.
I know. Well, you were there at the time.
Yes. Unfortunately, 1973, your contract ended.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
I could have stayed on actually, but you know, after a couple of years, you need a break.
You need a break. But you remained passionate about Bangladesh.
Yes, in fact, after spending a bit of time in England, I then went to work. I left the Frères the French people, and I went to work for a British organisation who were operating in Vietnam and also Cambodia.
Yeah, and then you went back to Dhaka again.
I did.
When was that?
Well, what happened, as you're probably aware, if you watched television at the time, the whole edifice of Vietnam came crashing to the ground, and so we had to leave, and then it became one country. It was unified again under the North Vietnamese. It became one country.
Yes, yes.
Anyway,
when did you go to Bangladesh?
well,
and,
that's right. I went from there to Thailand, from Vietnam to Thailand, and then hung around there a bit. Then I thought I'd pop in and see some friends in Dhaka, some of my Bangladeshi friends, which I did. But while I was there, I was offered a job actually with the people I've been working with in Vietnam, and I took it up. And at that time, that was 1975. 1975 that was, in the spring. There'd been a lot of flooding in Bangladesh at the time, so one of the projects they had was a flood recovery project. It was up near your part of the neck of the woods, up in Sylhet. Yes, there's been really bad flooding. People lost their homes.
So you went there.
We were involved in trying to get on the rehabilitation program, and I can remember one particularly a very energetic government official, Khalid Shams, who had known previously, he worked in the Ministry of Relief and Rehabilitation in the Secretariat building in Motijil in Dhaka, who really was very helpful to us. Yes.
1975, you were there.
Yes.
15th of August, Bangabandhu was assassinated. Where were you?
Well, that's right. We had a small bungalow in Dunmundi, the residential area in Dhaka, and we were about maybe 100, 150 metres from Sheikh Mujib's family home.
Yeah.
And but I remember that night we were woken up by gunfire just behind our house, further away. And we were told by a local person that soldiers had attacked Sheikh Mujib's house, and we later found out, in fact, that he'd been assassinated.
Together with his family.
Yes, his immediate family members. For his daughter was actually in Germany. Sheikh Hasina was in Germany at the time, and she escaped that assassination. Yes.
So then, after that, you came back to England.
I did indeed.
And a new chapter began.
Yes.
The UKIS and the Immigration Advisory Service, and for which you were the International Operations Director.
I eventually ended up at that, but I didn't start off in that position.
Yes. So then we met.
Yes.
And tell us about IS.
You know, I thought that my connections with Bangladesh were over then, but they weren't. In fact, I've built new connections, partly through meeting you, and also the fact that there were many immigrants who were coming from Bangladesh at that time. It was usually women and children joining their families, and to be honest, they were having a bit of a rough time with the British High Commission in Dhaka over visas. So one of the things we did was to try and ease their passage.
Dr. David Carter, the British High Commissioner, himself came to Sylhet to open it.
Yep, he came up and opened it. I remember the day, and you proudly escorted him around.
Yes, I did. I did, yes. Micheal, it's been a pleasure having you. Unfortunately, you know, such an interesting conversation, but time has run out.
Yes,
and I have to say goodbye to you. I want to thank you for coming to Channel S. Viewers, as usual, we bring special friends, and today has not been an exception. And thank you so much for watching Channel S. Stay with us.